Family disputes can make us feel isolated and vulnerable. Maybe you're going through a divorce or a legal dispute about your kids. Perhaps you've spent hours on Google or have even posted anonymously on Facebook to see what others have to say. But are you getting the actual information and support that you're looking for? Our podcast, Legal Lounge, aims to dispel misinformation and downright bad legal information to empower anyone with questions about their family, their children, their finances, their marriage, and the law. As a team focused exclusively on family law matters, we aim to help listeners not only with the information they need, but also with the hope that their situation has a solution. Short disclaimer, please note this podcast is for educational purposes only, and the information should not be relied upon as legal advice or for legal purposes. Welcome back to another episode of Legal Lounge. Today, I have a friend of mine who is in the very complex world of immigration. And especially in today's climate, I think this is a hot topic. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So my name is Mary Lynn Tedesco. I am the owner, founder, lead attorney at Tedesco Legal, an immigration law firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. We specialize in primarily family, humanitarian-based and removal defense, but we also work with some individuals who are business owners looking to either invest in the United States or bring a new branch of their company into the United States. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Pleasure to have you. And I guess just a little bit about the structure, because for family law, we're very much in the district court, county level of the judicial system. So the courtrooms. So you'll find me at your local courthouse. Where would someone find you? Because I know it's not the same courtroom as me.
Yes. So there's a few different branches, so to say, of the same immigration arm of the government, right?
Okay.
So on one hand, if I'm defending a client in removal proceedings, you'll find me at an immigration court, which is an administrative entity. It's an administrative law court under the umbrella of the Department of Justice. So it's the Department of Justice Executive Office for Immigration Review. On the other hand, if I'm working on more of an affirmative benefit, whether that be based on family or an employer, you'll find me at USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And that's actually a branch of the Department of Homeland Security. So a slightly different branch than the Department of Justice. And then on the other hand, if you have somebody who is maybe a family member that is abroad or an employer or an employee or an investor that's abroad, then you'll also find me working with the Department of State. So 3 different entities of the same federal government, all with different intricacies and different requirements and different people in charge of them.
That is a very complex system you have to navigate. I don't envy you.
Yes. It's interesting because the way that all these branches are truly very different. So on one hand, when I'm in an immigration court, it's not the same type of court that you practice in.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
You are in a truly independent judiciary arm of the government, right? So federalism, judiciary, all of the executive. No, when I'm in immigration court, the Department of Justice technically is an arm of the executive branch. So the head would be the Attorney General setting policy and guideposts and things for these judges to operate within. And so certainly they are judicial in nature, but they are at the end of the day administrative. So everything that I do is administrative law, even if the complexities of how that is structured is different than what you're used to.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I think that's an important delineation, because a lot of individuals, their primary exposure to the court system in our field is through like Law and Order and Suits and shows, right? And maybe they've gotten a traffic ticket, so they hire a traffic attorney, and that is in technically kind of like a criminal court, but we call it traffic court, which is more similar to family court because we're in the same courthouse and we're dealing with district court judges as well. On the flip side, you're not technically dealing with judges district court judges, rather they're administrative officials.
Right. So the removal proceedings are administrative law judges, right?
Mhm.
So in theory, it falls within the federal court system. But even let's say rules of evidence,
Sure.
you have to follow rules of evidence when you're in district court in any matter, right? In theory, the laws that apply in removal proceedings are the federal rules of civil procedure.
Mhm.
But they're not applied strictly. And even if you look at the Code of Federal Regulations that talk about the rules that apply in immigration court, you're not talking about a strict adherence to the federal rules of civil procedure. And so it's all over the place.
Mhm.
The administration of the courts, the policies, everything can change on a dime depending on who's in charge of the executive branch on that particular year. And so that's been something that we've really seen happen now. With lots and lots of policy changes coming down the pipeline. And, what's the rule today might not be the rule tomorrow or next week.
Mhm.
And that's definitely caused some challenges with planning for cases.
Sure.
Timelines are
Yeah.
changing. And then on the other hand, stepping out of immigration court, let's say, I'm dealing with a client who's applying for their green card and we're scheduled for an interview. We're talking about U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Those adjudicators are not even judges. They're not even lawyers. They're just individuals who are trained on policies within the agency, but they're not necessarily required to have any formal legal training.
Interesting.
My favorite officers that I have come across have been lawyers because I can talk to them and they understand what I'm saying and they get it and they really truly appreciate and understand the intricacies of the laws that we're trying to apply. But it's very frustrating sometimes when you're sitting in front of somebody that's making a decision about one of your clients' lives and something that might impact their family, their children, their parents, their spouse, and you're speaking with somebody who's not wholly trained on administrative law as a whole.
Or law.
Or law in general.
Period. Yeah.
Or law in general.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why, a plug here for how we got to become lawyers is, we have to graduate from high school, we have to graduate from college, we have to go to law school, but oh wait, we still have to then take a bar exam. So there's a lot of layers to the education before we can even sit down with a client to say, hey, these are your legal rights.
Absolutely. And so what that leads to in the framework of immigration, at least, especially like I said, not so much in removal proceedings because there are some protections at least, but when we're, adjudicating a benefit in front of USCIS, I mean, requests for evidence are the mechanism by which an officer might ask for either more documentation or clarification on how the person meets the requirements for a particular benefit. And sometimes we get these and it's like, you have obviously absolutely no idea what you're talking about and you have no idea what's going on. And here, let me explain it for you. But then it's very interesting the way that it crosses over my ability to explain to our clients what's going on.
Sure.
And then I'm not necessarily writing a legal brief the way I would for a judge. I'm writing it for almost a lay person.
Yeah.
And so it requires a different way of thinking than the purely legal when I'm in a courtroom type of legal mindset. It's really boiling things down of like, okay, this says this. I'll give you an example. We had this issue.
I love her passion, by the way. Just throwing it out there.
I have a client and she's, just a wonderful woman. She's been here for forever and we were doing her citizenship. She had been through a very long, arduous process even before she came to me. But we get a decision on her citizenship, a denial, citing a rule that was wholly disregarding the entire process that she had gone through. And it was clearly because this person saw something in her file that was like, oh, I know about that. It means that she's not eligible for her citizenship. Well, no. Did you look back at the rest of the file? Oh, no, of course you did not. And then did you look at how this regulation plays in with the other one? So it's just because of the way that law is, where this phrase might mean something different here than it does there. And you have to cross-check to the other regulation on the other side of the code. A layperson is not trained to do that the way an attorney is. And so it definitely helps to have your own lawyer on your side, making sure that that's done correctly. And not leaving it to the hands of the layperson.
And it's very interesting you say that because I feel I hope I have as much passion for family law as you do for immigration. I think I do. I think I do.
I think you do too.
Oh, I think
I
you're
think
too
you do
kind. Building relationships is a natural part of life. But how does the law affect those relationships? Do you want to marry your significant other, but have cold feet from the many divorce horror stories out there? Are you preparing for a custody battle against your ex? That is where modern legal comes in. We offer education and knowledge about the law when it affects the relationships near and dear to your heart. To learn more about how family law affects your family, book a consultation with an attorney of our modern legal team by visiting our website, emailing us, or calling us at 704-286-6302. Check out the information about Modern Legal Services at modernlegalnc.com. There are so many nuances and interplays of different, not only statutes, but then we also have case law. And case law, just for the listener to kind of understand how that works, is a case may be presented at the district court level, and a judge at the district court level issues a ruling. And they issue a ruling somewhat by shooting in the dark because there isn't any history or what we call precedence for the same specific issue. And so, what can happen is the losing party, if you will, at that trial, at that stage, can appeal it. And in family courts, as compared to any other matter in district courts, is directly appealable to the Court of Appeals. So we don't even go to the superior courts. We go straight to Raleigh to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. And then a panel of judges, not just one, but a panel of judges reviews the legal issues in that question. And sometimes they'll overturn it saying, hey, district court judge, you just need some more details. Then we can have a better idea of what's going on. Or they may say, yeah, no, we don't believe that is how the law should be, pretty much. And just say, hey, try it again. This is it, income should be imputed based on a one-person household versus a two-person household. And there's so many other intricacies that are in play. And those Court of Appeal opinions, by the way, come out on a regular basis. It could be every couple of months. It could be more or less frequent, but family laws are changing every couple of months. There's new laws. And so we have to then interplay that new knowledge with the history of the statutes and other case law. And how does one override the other? And when I say it's hard to keep up with, and I have a family law firm of a team of attorneys that are regularly researching this and regularly being presented with cases from our clients, I can only imagine the judge who maybe never practiced family law before they got on the bench. Because I promise you, they're not doing the research and following the cases like we are. And then and understandably, judges are busy. So they're not always going to see, even with their law degree, they're still not going to see all the nuances of the law that are at play for a specific family circumstance. And then go one step further, we have the added layer of emotion. So, there's the emotional factor that also comes into play that we have to help our clients navigate through when it comes to their families and the courts.
And I think that emotional level is definitely just as heavy in the immigration sector. I think that's one of the biggest crossovers that we have in our fields, that we're talking about real human beings and they're planning for their lives and who is in those lives and in what capacity and how. And it's the same thing. It's the permanency, right? So, is my mom going to be able to stay here? Is my mom going to be here? Or is my child going to be able to stay with me? Or is my spouse going to be able to stay with me? You talk about case law. We do have some case law. The Board of Immigration Appeals is they're allowed to review certain matters, but there are other matters that, it's stripped from jurisdiction because they're considered discretionary benefits. So, and this is something that's interesting and not necessarily unique, but certainly distinct in our circuit. So we have USCIS and we have the Department of Justice, Executive Office of Immigration Review, and they both have their own separate appeals tracks based on what the Immigration and Nationality Act, codified at 8 USC, and then the Code of Federal Regulations. Where do they place the appeals? And so if I'm adjudicating a benefit before USCIS, certain benefits, there are appeal rights, but it's still only within the confines of the Department of Homeland Security, right? So there's USCIS, and then I can appeal to the Administrative Appeals Office or the AAO. In immigration court, there's a slightly more robust appeals process. I can go from the Executive Office of Immigration Review up to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and then in some cases to the Fourth Circuit, U.S. Fourth Circuit, and then some cases above that up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so there is an appeals track, but if you're talking about very basic, right, building blocks of case law, the decisions of every individual immigration judge is not really searchable. It has to be shared by a practitioner, by an attorney with the legal community to be put into some type of decision bank privately. Or, file a Freedom of Information Act and try and get all the decisions, but they might not release most of them because if they are asylum related, then there are certain issues of protecting individuals' privacy rights that you can't just get a copy of their decision. And USCIS certainly, it's based on policy and they can publish what they want, but most of what they do, they don't publish. And so I wish that we had more case law because at least you'd know, what those judges are really thinking. And because otherwise we're just kind of flying blind based on our own reputations and what those judges have as reputation and each individual officer. Is it a good one or a bad one on a good day or a bad day?
I was going to do a side note here. I think that's why it's critical, even for us, because I will say not every family law case gets to go through the appellate process, even if we think at the district court level, the judge shouldn't have ruled a certain way. So it turns into okay, what can we find out? Oh, wait, we'll probably find out more if we just get a bunch of family law or immigration attorneys together over coffee one morning.
I think that's important for us as attorneys to have a network. And here in Mecklenburg County, I'm part of the Mecklenburg Bar Association. We do a monthly lunch with the immigration lawyers just to talk. Even if it's just complaining, complaining or, just venting, having that opportunity for camaraderie. But also it's like, hey, you have this judge. I haven't had them yet. What are they like on these types of cases?
I was going to say mirror in the family law realm. We actually have a unofficial email account, if you will, that we all share information on. Don't tell certain people, just our listeners can know. But to your point, it's to make sure that we're all working together as a field of law for this specific community. And we know what can influence our clients' situations and cases. That's critical.
Absolutely. And you can't choose your judge, but at least you can be armed with the particulars of what that judge likes as far as procedure goes. And I think that's important. You can be prepared. I worked for a judge before I even went to law school, and he was a big proponent of the poor preparation yields poor performance. And proper preparation is a positive performance. And so that kind of sits in the back of my head. Is I need to have all the intel that I can. And I can't do it all myself, but if I have a good network of friends and trusted colleagues, then you can get it done.
Yeah. And I think that's good for the listener to know is that when they hire an attorney, it's not like you're just getting one brain on your case. You're actually getting a whole team and a network beyond that team, which is in being informed by so many different factors. And so that's the resource we bring to our clients.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that somebody that has a smaller team than your office might not be able to do that, but it depends on whether that person has created a network that will allow them to reach out to the colleague that might not be in the same office as them and still have the intel.
Yep. And the cross practice area intel. Because yes, listeners, I call Mary Lynn a good bit.
And I call Theresa when I have complicated marital issues, which seems to come up more and more these days.
I know. So let's jump to that piece, the whole marriage concept, because I know in the immigration courts and in the administrative proceedings that you see, marriage is a little bit different than how we see it in our side in family law.
It is. And it's sort of, as much as your case law might be evolving, the perspectives of these immigration officers doesn't truly reflect what the most recent case says in a particular place. And then couple that with the fact that they might not just be looking at North Carolina law.
Mhm.
It can be North Carolina law and then the law from Ghana or Nigeria or El Salvador or Honduras or wherever it is that this person might have been married before.
Yeah.
Or had a child before or had a custody case before. So, when I'm calling you, it's because either somebody forgot to get divorced or they thought that their marriage wasn't recognized here in the United States because, I was married in Mexico, but I wasn't married in the United States. Like, well, no, you were married everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that can cause some complexities but it directly affects the benefit that they're trying to apply for, especially when we're talking about a marriage-based benefit.
Yeah.
And that is a large part of my practice. Or it could be child custody. That could be a large part of the practice as well. Did the person have a custody order back home? Was it was it a real one? Was it, an informal one? Was there a judge there? Was there not a judge there?
Yeah. Specifically for family law here in North Carolina, marriage is defined a certain way. And it's funny because a lot of people are like, well, you absolutely need the marriage certificate. And I'm like, actually, your marriage may still be valid even without that certificate, but that's a whole nother conversation. We'll save for that for a different episode. But when you're talking about marriage across the board, you want to triple check what comes with that. So for example, marriages in Mexico, there is a process. Let me preface this. I'm not licensed to practice law in Mexico. So this is not legal advice. This is information, education I know. But in Mexico, you actually have to sit down with a clerk of court, if you will, and they will discuss with you whether or not you want to hold property in the marital relationship jointly or separately. And their property ownership regimes. And you actually have to choose one of the two. And it's on your marriage certificate that you get when you get married in Mexico. Well, the courts in Texas and California, I'm also only licensed in North Carolina, not Texas or California, but the courts in Texas and California have viewed that as a form of a prenup when you're discussing marital property rights.
Really interesting.
Right? Now, North Carolina, it has not been determined yet by the higher up courts. I almost had the chance to take it up. I know it would have been nice to have my name on that case law, but we settled the case instead, which was best for my client. But it's one of those situations where there are so many intertwining factors that we have to take into consideration when we're thinking about a legal marriage and then a legal divorce.
Right.
Because we've literally had that case together, just so the listener knows.
Yes. No, and it really does. I mean, it really does impact things. And I feel like in law school, I remember, having read the case about the quickie divorce in Dominican Republic, I think it was.
Sure was.
And it's funny. I'm like, I'm not going to practice family law, so I don't need to worry about this until your client comes to you with a decision from immigration saying, we don't believe you're really divorced and therefore you're in a bigamous relationship. Therefore, we can't trust your new marriage. And then even that might not be correct, as you have, kindly informed me that USCIS thinks of marriage in one way. And it's not with the knowledge and the background that a family law practitioner will have about the validity of that marriage. From my perspective, the way that I've always seen it with immigration is that first in time is the valid marriage, right? So I was married and my divorce was improper. Therefore, my second marriage must not be valid because the first one is the one that's given credence. And I think that's what you were telling me.
It's a little different because in North Carolina specifically, they really want to look at how are individuals holding themselves out as. So if, for example, a couple gets married and they believe they've gotten divorced and then one of the parties gets remarried, then the courts will treat it as such for the most part to consider the second marriage as the valid marriage. So it wouldn't be considered bigamy and it wouldn't be, not that they do prosecute it, but it wouldn't be prosecuted in a criminal sense, right? However, that's very different than the immigration courts.
Very different.
And that determines status, legal status.
Absolutely. And whether you can grant your spouse a benefit is wholly dependent on whether that marriage is valid or not. And so if on one hand, the family, and this is what's hard, I think, for these officers too, without legal training is, I might be an officer in North Carolina today, but I could get transferred to an office in California tomorrow. And now I'm supposed to know an entire new body of state case law about whether or not a marriage is valid. And then analyze that and apply it on a swath of people.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it creates this chaos in
Yep.
the system that you're analyzing multiple different bodies of law all at the
Yeah.
same time. And it's impacting real people.
Yeah. And for the most part, like the case you were just referencing a moment ago, that was a unique circumstance because generally speaking, North Carolina will recognize foreign divorces. However, there is a public policy that you can't get a quickie divorce. So, go one step further, North Carolina does have the authority to say that they're not going to recognize a divorce. Therefore, a marriage is still ongoing or not ongoing, right? Question here, especially if they've remarried.
Right.
And then on top of that, does that then give North Carolina the authority to assume jurisdiction to then grant a divorce?
Right. And the international sense of the laws and how we grant comity in general to decisions by other courts in other nations, I think is important. But then, like you're saying, these public policy decisions are more complex than just one individual, because there's also two people in the marriage, right? So for my client, it's maybe better for that divorce to be granted here in the North Carolina, and say that the one outside of the United States was not valid. But for his ex, I mean, if she's already derived a benefit because that original divorce was not problematic, well, now she's got a decision saying that that divorce is not valid. And so different people have different needs and wants from the law, and it creates chaos for these individuals.
Sure does. Yeah.
Sometimes you need to have a cooperative effort, like you're saying, make sure that your attorney at least has a friend or knows somebody that they can talk to in a different seat, in a different role about a different thing, because there is so much cross discipline to these decisions.
And every family is so unique. Every person's situation is so unique. So, some of these quickie divorces, if you will, maybe were thought by both parties to be valid, a valid process. Another issue is, there's some entities out there in different countries that are not actual legal entities. So yes, there are these divorces or legal documents that are stamped by grandma down the street who has no authority in this country to enter such a judgment or order. And we see that. And so we also have to do our due diligence to make sure we're getting the documents from the proper authorities.
Right. And figuring that out in less developed nations that maybe have very bad record keeping is not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah.
I mean, you can ask your client to, go to their home country and, get them the document and give them even specific information about maybe what the Department of State says is the right document. And they can produce something that they fully believe is the correct document, and it might not be.
Yeah.
And we don't have authenticative, we can't authenticate documents ourselves. Yeah. And so, and we go down a whole rabbit hole about that, about getting the Department of State to authenticate things, but that's a whole other process that takes, time. Yeah. And then it's the time. And do you always have that time? And right now in this climate rather, not all of my clients have time. And that's something that, just puts a lot of pressure onto the individual and on the system as a whole, where, on one hand, there's this need and this interest in judicial efficiency and finality and, moving cases through the system. But on the other hand, not all cases can fit into a specific timeline because you need to make sure that these things are done right.
Yeah. And you've gotten the documents from the proper authorities.
And having counsel to work through those complexities and think through them and go down the rabbit hole for you is important. And it's funny, I don't know if you hear this as much. You might with like the context of divorce. Well, I don't want to pay a lawyer. They're too expensive. I don't, I can do this myself. Or even more hurting my soul is like, well, you just fill out the forms, right? It's like, part of what I do is fill out forms, and I have paralegals to help me with that too. So I'm not, I might not even be the one doing that. That's a fair statement, except for you're missing the rest of it.
Yes.
Which is making sure what you're putting in that forms, the supporting documents that you're including them with that. Are you proving your case sufficiently?
Mm-hmm.
And are you missing any issues?
Yeah.
Issue spotting is an entire part of what an
Yes.
attorney is responsible for doing. And missing those or not even knowing that you're supposed to be looking for them
Yep.
can cause huge problems.
Just go to pro se day court in family law, and you'll see it all the time. And every once in a while, I've had to walk in on a judge's pro se day, and those are the days where parties are allowed to come without attorneys, and so the courts do actually tend to pile more cases in because they can get through them quicker because they don't have the attorneys doing all the smart attorney stuff to prolong the situation with those pesky evidence rules and rules of civil procedure. But it's so interesting because I'll see pro se parties making these arguments, and I'm like, say this, and they didn't say it. They missed the whole point of the proceeding. Judge is not going to be able to grant custody or visitation or whatever it may be. And I even had judges call me up to the bench after I did the right thing, right? Because technically within the law, I'm like, no, you're right, within the law, because they didn't bring it up.
Right.
So you can't grant them the relief without the issues that need to be brought up for a judge to grant relief. Judges are bound by the law, so they cannot get creative. They cannot read your mind. They cannot just admit things that you just want them to see without authenticity and a basis for admitting them. And so to your exact point, it's like, yeah, some forms are involved, but forms are the minimal part of our business.
Right. That's the boiled down. And here's the really interesting thing. And this wasn't the case for the past 4 years. But the 4 years before that, and what I believe is what we're going to start seeing moving forward is, let's say you presented, you're not in immigration problems at this point, but you've filed an application for a benefit and, you're on the right track and you might be fully eligible, and you make a procedural error that costs you your case. The government is going to send you a notice to appear in removal proceedings if you are not currently in status. Mm-hmm. And you might have tried to do everything right, and you might be eligible for that benefit. Mm-hmm. But now you have the added complexity of now having to present yourself in front of an immigration judge who's going to determine that you probably are removable. And maybe you have relief, but is that relief before USCIS or the judge? And will the judge wait for that removal proceeding or wait for that relief outside of removal proceedings? Some will, some won't, depends on the circumstance. Mm-hmm. And so the consequences, for you all as well, you could lose your child, or you don't get visitation, or you have to split your property in a different way. But, the consequence on the immigration side of things is financially. So you didn't want to pay the lawyer before. You definitely are going to need one if you're in front of an immigration judge. And not only that, but if you made a misstep in the wrong type of case, it literally could mean an order of removal. Yeah. And then dealing with that is, especially now in today's climate, very, very high stakes.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on a lot today, and I appreciate you being here. This has been, I'm sure, eye-opening with all the rabbit holes for the listener.
I hope
so if the listener does want to learn more about you and the services your firm provides, can you tell them where to find you?
Absolutely. So our website is Tedesco, Tedesco, immigration.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Tedesco Legal PC. We also have a very active Facebook. And then we have a YouTube channel all based on Tedesco Legal PC, and we're all interlinked. So you can find us there. And then on my website, you can actually book an appointment directly with me on my calendar. And I appreciate sincerely you inviting me to be on this podcast. I love all of this, and especially going down these rabbit holes with you. It's always fun. The time flies.
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our discussion. To learn more about me and the Modern Legal team, go to our website, modernlegalnc.com, or check out the links in our show notes to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also call us at 704-286-6302. If you have been intrigued by the conversation and would like us to continue our discussions, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. See you next time.